Hey everyone, Liz Merrick here. Today I'm going to teach you how to make this really cool stone fondant texture. Yep, this is fondant. It's coming up next on the Sugar Geek Show. So what I have here is just a cake dummy that has been roughly covered, and I mean rough, roughly covered in fondant because we're just gonna cover it again. So just imagine that this is like a double barrel buttercream cake. And then I have some different colors of fondant. So I've got some like kind of marbled gray. I just took a little bit of black food coloring and marbled it into some white. Take that out. I've got some regular white. And then I have some more marbled gray that has been sitting in an open bag for maybe 3 or 4 days. So it has these really hard chunks of fondant that are kind of dried out on top. That's going to be really useful for creating texture. It's like the only time that having dried out crunchy fondant is going to help you. Got 2 pieces. And then we have some crystal sugar. This is just white sparkling sugar. And then I also have some rock candy. I also have some just little cheap molds that I've had around forever. I think 2 of these you can get on Sugar Geek Shop, but you can also get them on Amazon. And they're just like little leaf press molds and flower molds. I also have some tin foil to be creating texture on the fondant. And then of course our beloved torch. Can't go anywhere or create any sort of textures without it. So I'm just gonna pretend that this is cake. I'm just gonna cut open a little piece. Do it the exact same way if it was cake. This would be some really dry cake though. I'm not gonna go crazy with my big chunk. We're gonna get the gist across and then move on. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is take some of my white fondant here. I'm gonna make a big blob. So usually when I've done this in the past, I use royal icing or buttercream, and it's just so messy. It's really, really hard to get the rock sugar and stuff to stick to that. So we're doing something different. So I'm gonna take my piece of fondant, I'm gonna get wet, just some water, take my rock candy, and I'm just going to press that into the fondant to make our little geode. I don't know why I've never thought of this before. Okay, so get that on there. Pretend that this is buttercream. And then we'll take our little geode piece and we can stick that on there with minimal loss of candies, ideally. So we still have our little indent. A little bit easier to handle though, instead of trying to take individual pieces of rocks and stick them up on the side. All right, so now I'm just gonna take a few of these rocks and just kind of fill in some of those empty spaces in the fondant so that it's just, it's all sharp. And if you had some broken pieces of ice melt, that would work just as well. Just use what you have. You don't have to oh my gosh, I can't make this cake because I don't have rock candy or whatever. You could even use crunched up candies. And then, the key to all organic looking things, even geode cakes, is to not make it look like any lady parts, right? So we don't want it to look like a perfect this shape. We want to give it some organic nature, so I'm going to kind of mess it up a little bit so it doesn't look quite so weird. Okay, so I have some of my gray fondant here, and it's very dry on top. So you can see the skin is starting to crack and stuff. That's good. That's what you want. And then we have some of this dry, crackly fondant. We're going to put that kind of together. Try and crumble it up a little bit. This is very open to interpretation. So I'm just kind of pressing that together. So I have like this gray and kind of this white sort of sandwiched together. And just kind of push that down. I also have some black. Put some black in there. And just wherever you want it to be. I'm going to start kind of rolling this out a little bit just to get it kind of flattened and see what's happening here. And then I'm going to take some of my sparkling sugar, kind of put that on there. And that just kind of gets pushed into the fondant and creates not only a little bit of shine, but just some texture, so it's not quite so flat. Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit of powdered sugar down on my table to keep it from sticking. Okay, and then I'm gonna torch. It's like all the textures, right? You don't have to torch everywhere, and I'm certainly not going to, but it does kind of help things get a little bit more cracked looking. All right, torched. A little bit of white. Brush the white over the top, mostly in the dark spots, you know? And that just kind of not only brings out the texture, but it kind of gives it like an ashy, dry look. And what happens is when we go ahead and roll out the fondant, because we've torched it, it's gonna bring out those cracks. But you need the food coloring. Otherwise, nothing will happen. Okay, so now we have like this rough textured fondant. Got all of this, these sprinkles in here. We've torched it, we've colored it. It's gonna be a little bit wet because I'm not gonna let it fully dry. You can see I started out with a very small amount of fondant, but as we roll it out and continue to add layers of texture, it becomes bigger. So you end up not having to use as much as you think. So we've got all this cool texture in here from the crystals. Might even put some more in there because I like them. Just push those in with the rolling pin. Now, before I go ahead and put this on, I'm gonna actually paint my geode gold. And that's just gonna make it a little bit easier so I don't accidentally paint over my stone texture on the fondant. So I'm just using a big fluffy brush and my favorite Truly Mad Plastics gold. I love how it looks, it's so pretty. Little tip when you're using gold, in case you don't know, the trick to getting good coverage is making sure that your gold is super saturated. It should look about the consistency of kind of like a thin like paint. If it's super watery, then there's just too much liquid and the gold doesn't cover well. I love it. So pretty. So shiny. So I'm just gonna mist to this with a little bit of water because fondant isn't sticky. So now I'm gonna carefully take my fondant here and just kind of wrap it around. And we're not gonna care too much about tearing. We're gonna let that happen, right? And we might even do some purposeful tearing like this. Oh yeah, I like how that looks. I swear people are just like, Liz, enough. Enough with the kintsugi style cakes. I can't help it. I just love them too much. So I kind of tore this down here so that this gold piece right here, I'm gonna paint more gold in here and kind of keep that tear going even further. Cut off the excess down around the bottom. So I just basically need one more piece for right here. take this, put it back on, just tear whatever you don't want away. So just like I had the bottom kind of have this crack that goes all the way through, I'm going to continue that on the other side. Cut that off. Stick. All right. Just when you thought we were done, we're not. All right, so now in between all of these little areas where the fondant has cracked, I'm going to go ahead and paint gold because it looks pretty. That's why. The key, I think, to making this type of cake look good is just, you know, letting yourself be not a control freak and just kind of letting things happen naturally and just enjoying sort of the outcome, you know? It's a good stress relieving cake. I've done some where I'm just like, ugh, this just looks like I tried too hard. Very pretty. I like it. Now we're gonna make some little flowers. My little molds here. With your leftover fondant so that it all matches, we're just gonna press some flowers into there. So we're just gonna use whichever flowers you want and just press them in to the mold and then pull them out. All right, there we go. A lot easier. Cornstarch just keeps it from sticking to your fingers. So then I'm gonna take some water, attach some flowers, and we're gonna kind of cluster them together. Where you decide to put them is totally up to you. But the idea is that they look like they're part of the stone, like they've almost been carved out of the stone. So hopefully that makes sense. You don't have to do this, but this is what people ask me. I'm like, how do you get this like base relief on the stone? And it's literally just this. It's just making little molds and then attaching it to the texture. So the last thing I'm gonna do is just add a couple of leaves. I have this little tiny leaf mold, and then you can add some little, just some variation, you know, so it's just not the same flower over and over again. Lastly, I'm just gonna take some white and just kind of lightly brush over the surface to just catch that texture, and it helps it blend into the rest of the stone around it. If you don't like any of the spots, like I felt like this section off to the side was just a little bit too harsh, you can just take off the fondant and layer on a new piece. Inevitably, I always end up getting some gold dust around the bottom of my cake board, and I'll use baby wipes to clean that up. So I have some melted isomalt here. This is just some leftover blue that I had from another project. It doesn't matter what color it is for this because we're gonna paint it gold anyway. And I have my large crystal mold that you can get from simicakes.com. And I'm just going to start pouring. This is the pre-made isomalt from Simi Cakes, but you could also make your own using the isomalt recipe on sugargeekshow.com if you want to make it from scratch. Or you can also use my lollipop recipe, which is a little bit stickier than isomalt, but will still work. So I'm just pouring it nice and slowly so that it goes into all those crevices minimize bubbles all the way until it reaches the top. And then it's going to take quite a while for this to cool down. So just go ahead and set this aside while you work on other stuff. Okay, so my crystal is nice and firm. I'm going to go ahead and take it out of the mold and just carefully start loosening up the edges so I don't break any of the crystals. And then you just take one wedge off. Just wiggle back and forth. You don't want to pull outwards because that'll snap it, so just keep wiggling. I'm pushing this way and wiggling. There's one and two. Last one's a little bit tricky. I'm going to hold on to the crystal and push it this way. Wiggling. There we go. A couple of little shards that I'm just going to torch off. You don't want to torch too much or you'll get rid of your sharp edges. If you have a lot of bubbles, you can heat up like a little knife. As you can see, I've done this many times with this knife. Get it nice and hot. And then you can kind of sharpen up the edges without ruining the crystal. Slightly time consuming, but sometimes I do this and sometimes I don't bother. And as you're doing this, you'll end up getting a buildup of sugar on your knife. So just occasionally clean that off on a damp paper towel. Otherwise it just catches the knife on fire. Okay, so now I can place this on top of the cake and paint it. I'm actually going to cut out a little bit of my fondant that we put on already, so it looks a little bit more like it fits in there. Adding a little bit more rock candy to the sides. Then I'm going to go ahead and paint the crystal gold. This is my Truly Mad Plastics gold luster dust mixed with a little bit of Everclear until it's nice and thick and just looks gorgeous. One of the reasons I love using the Truly Mad Plastics Super Gold is that the shine is like a true gold. It's not too yellowy or, you know, brassy looking. It just looks like a really, really nice gold, and it covers super well. I'm just kind of, you know, slopping it on there, and you don't have any like brush streaks, and it just like stays super shiny. And there we go. Our stone texture is now complete. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. I'm Liz Merrick, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!